Welcome to today's lesson on using AssetOptics for Lightning Experience. This is lesson 4 on maintenance, repair, and operations inventory management. You'll see on the screen today's learning objectives. The first bullet, custom objects and terminology, is a very broad category. With the exception of account, most of the objects that we'll be looking at today are custom objects that are part of the managed package. We'll also be looking at the options for how to replenish inventory and how inventory replenishment is calculated on the stock item record. We'll also look at the several ways that you can issue stock items to a work order, most notably the stock issue request. So let's get started. The first object we'll look at is the item master. Now the item master is simply the enterprise-wide catalog item. It does not represent actual physical inventory. If desired, you could maintain item master records for parts you don't even stock. The use of the item master, it is a requirement if you're going to use bills of materials and/or you're going to set up multiple storerooms. Even if you're not planning to do either of those two things, we still strongly recommend all users to use the item master. You can see on this particular item master record several important fields. In the inventory details field section, you see the total on-hand quantity. This refers to the stock items which are linked to this item master record. And just to preview this item, we have 2 stock items associated with this item master. We see we have a discrete quantities checkbox. When this box is checked, which it is by default, that means that you can only catalog and inventory these items as integer values. In other words, you cannot break something into a half or a quarter or a fraction. If you uncheck that, you can issue continuous quantities. In the item specifications section, this particular item master record also has nouns and modifiers associated with it. Nouns, modifiers, and attributes are a 3-level master detail relationship, custom objects, which can help you classify your item masters. For example, here we have V-belts, and there are several modifiers for V-belts, such as cogged, standard, banded, and so forth. And each of those modifiers has its own set of attributes. You can actually see the Lightning Web component over here on the right-hand side of my screen, or even on the related list, you can see these item attributes, which are, again, in a master detail relationship with modifier. The actual values, the attribute values, can be edited here at the item master level, and any stock items that are created and or linked to this item master will inherit those values. So this makes it easy to, again, classify and search for things. You may have noticed also this attribute description here contains the elements of the attributes that appear on the related list and in the Lightning Web component. This is created automatically. Now, I've already mentioned the storeroom, so let's just have a quick look at a storeroom. A storeroom, again, is just a warehouse or storage area where you put inventory items, that is where you put stock items. Typically, a storeroom record will have a default buyer, billing and shipping addresses, and it has a set of general ledger accounts which you can specify. You'll see from the related list that there are purchase orders, transfer orders, and stock issue requests, all of which are storeroom specific and are therefore on the related list. And you will also see all the stock items as well. And without further ado, the stock item. The stock item represents actual physical inventory in a storeroom. It is the intersection, if you will, of the item master and the storeroom. It's at the stock item level where on-hand quantities are managed and where inventory transactions take place. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's go back, look at a couple of records, maybe create a record, and understand better the terms that have been introduced thus far. So I'm just going to navigate back to the item master for this 4L160 belt. Again, the item master is the catalog master. If we look here in the related quick links pane, we see there are 2 stock items associated with this item master, one in the Plant 1 storeroom and one in the Satellite Maintenance Warehouse storeroom. Stock items are storeroom specific. The storeroom is a required field on the stock item. We'll see that in a moment when we create one. We were just looking at the 4L160 here in the Plant 1 storeroom. We would further see that there are actually multiple bins associated with this particular stock item. There's a primary bin location specified, and if we go here to the related links, we see that there's a secondary bin, and each of these are defined by a 4-segment sequence: row, section, level, bin. One of the bins is specified as the primary bin, and one of them, or if there are multiple, 2, 3, 4, are secondary, tertiary bins, and so forth. If we wanted to, we could go to a secondary bin and use this action to set it as the primary bin. Similarly, on the stock item record, when there are multiple bins associated with the stock item, there are these conditionally visible quick actions up here: new bin and bin transfer. Using these, you can either create a new bin or move things between bins. So you might want to do that if you have more than can fit in a particular bin within a storeroom. As I said, these bins are segmented as row, section, level, bin. You can also override this sort of like default classification scheme and simply check this box and then create your own name, and it might be something like back wall or top shelf, anything you want really. But let's have a look at how we would create a stock item record. Of course, like pretty much anything else in Salesforce or in AssetOptics, you could use the new stock item action there on the drop down from the menu, and you could fill out all the appropriate fields. And importantly, you'd want to look up the item master, assuming it's linked to an item master. A much easier way, though, is to actually use that action that appears on the item master record. So let's navigate back here to a recent item master. This is a 5VX1000 V-belt. There are actually no stock items associated with this item master. So this is a good example of an item master with no inventory associated with it. But for example, there might be a bill of materials associated with a particular engine or a machine of some sort, and it calls for one of these belts. The bill of materials would reference this item master. So we'll click this button up here that says New Stock Item. It's going to inherit the stock ID. It's going to inherit from the item master the same stock ID. You can actually change this if you want, but I think it's generally a good idea to maintain a perfect congruence between stock items and item masters, but it's up to you. As I said, it's mandatory that you search for and include the storeroom on the stock item record. So we're going to say that this is Plant 1. Now, since we created it from the item master, it does not land on that page. So we'll go over here and simply choose the stock ID. On the stock item record, we have the very important ordering information section. In combination with stocking information, this is really where you're defining your replenishment parameters. So you will see, for example, a sourcing type. This one is set to the default, which is purchase order, but transfer order is also an option. So in a multi-storeroom environment, you might do all your purchasing and receiving from a single storeroom and have satellite storerooms or mobile vans replenish via transfer order. There's also a field here for preferred vendor case pack, which we will have a look at in a moment. Importantly here, an auto order checkbox. This is checked by default, but it is necessary if you want to use automatic purchase requisition, purchase order creation to enable that in a batch Apex job, which can be scheduled to run 1 or more times per week. If you choose rather to order things manually, nevertheless, it will create for you list views of items to reorder according to your minimum stocking quantities. There's a field here called Reorder Point. This is a critically important field to understand with respect to your replenishment process. The reorder point is essentially your minimum stocking quantity or your safety stock level. Whenever the available quantity of stock items plus the on order quantity falls below this reorder point, the application is going to prompt you to order more. Now, the number that it asks you to order is going to be based on your economic order quantity and whatever number is required to surpass that threshold. So you may recall from lesson 2 on work management the concept of planned stock items. Planned stock items are those stock items that you put on a work order, and once the work order status is open and it falls within a need by date range, those parts, those stock items will no longer be available. So the available quantity plus whichever ones are on order, that number has to exceed your reorder point, or you will essentially have fallen short of your minimum requirement. Now, I know we went through that very quickly and it may be a bit overwhelming, so we're going to slow down for a second and we're going to manipulate those fields on this record, and then you can see how changes to one field affect the other. The first thing I think I'd like to do, though, is I'd actually like to perform a gain transaction on this stock item record just so that we have some on-hand quantity and we can play with that a little bit. So an inventory transaction, which we've not yet defined, is really just an inventory adjustment. The end user is capable of performing 3 types of inventory transactions. That would be a gain, a shrink, or an issue. And in this case, I'm actually going to gain 3 of these into the primary bin location. There are also some additional transaction types that can only be performed programmatically through Apex, and that would be an order, a receipt, and those are functions of purchasing, which we'll look at in the next lesson, or a transfer. And we've already alluded to the fact that satellite storerooms or secondary storerooms can replenish via transfer order. So if we look closely, we now see that we have an on-hand quantity of 3 for this stock item and an available quantity of 3. We've yet to specify what the reorder point is, so I'm going to scroll down to that field section and I'm going to put this in edit mode. We're going to specify the reorder point on this is 10. And I'm going to go ahead and save it just so we can have a look, and then we'll go back and make more edits. So the reorder point is 10, and we have an available quantity of 3. There are none on order. Therefore, it is telling me that the stock unit of measure quantity to reorder is 7. 7 plus 3 equals 10. I think that's pretty intuitive. That's the basic calculation. However, these 5VX1000 belts, they're small. It maybe doesn't make sense to order small quantities just because of shipping or for convenience. So we can actually specify an economic order quantity, an EOQ. And the EOQ is essentially just the minimum order size. Like we're never going to order fewer than like 10 of these, let's say. So if the EOQ is, well, let's go ahead and say 15 just for fun. If we say that the EOQ is 15, it's going to tell us to order 15. So every time the reorder point falls below 10, it's going to ask us to reorder a minimum of 15, whatever it takes to get past that reorder point. Now, before we can order anything, of course, we need to specify a vendor case pack. You can't order something without knowing what it is that you're going to order. In AssetOptics, you can specify multiple vendor case packs for each stock item. A minimum of 1 vendor case pack and one that is designated as the primary case pack is required if you're going to use any of the automated purchasing features of the application. So let's go ahead and create a vendor case pack, and I'll provide a definition. A vendor case pack is a vendor-specific purchase configuration with unique vendor part number, purchase unit of measure, purchase pack quantity, and purchase price. As I said, a stock item can have many vendor case packs, and one of those can be specified as the primary, and you can have vendor case packs for different vendors, or you could have multiple case packs for the same vendor on the same stock item. This just allows you to order things in different quantities from different places. Additionally, you can specify a lead time on the vendor case pack. So there may be instances where you need to order from the vendor whose lead time is shortest, even if that's not the cheapest. Whereas you might order from a different vendor if time is not so much of the essence. So to make this simple, I'll just begin by entering a purchase description. This will be created automatically if you leave this field blank by concatenating some of the fields on here, but I'm just going to call this 5VX 1000 single pack. And we're going to keep this simple. We're going to keep the purchase pack quantity of one in each. And we're going to say it's $7.50. The vendor here is a lookup to Salesforce accounts. And we're going to put the part number here and the lead time. I'm going to go ahead and say that this one is the primary case pack. That is the way that by default we order these things. I'm going to click Save and New and create another vendor case pack. And this will be from a different vendor. This time we'll call this 12 pack 5VX 1000 belts. And the purchase pack quantity here is going to be 12. And this purchase UOM, we'll just call this, well, a dozen or a box. That doesn't really matter so much. And this is going to be $80. And we're ordering these directly from Dayton, who is the manufacturer. And we'll hit Save. So as we've already seen, the stock unit of measure quantity to reorder says 15 because our EOQ is 15. Let's edit this field here and go back to 1. Now you see that the stock unit of measure quantity to reorder is 7. If we generated a purchase requisition based on these parameters, it would ask us only to order the number required to get us back to the reorder point of 10. But I'm going to change this back to 15. And again, it's going to tell us that we need to order 15 in the unit of measure. Now, since the primary case pack here is in eaches, that is individually, if we go to the list view, stock items to reorder purchase requisition, it should show us, and it does, that we need to order 15 of these as indicated on the line. But let's go back one more time. Let's change the primary vendor case pack. You'll recall this other vendor, we're buying these in the dozens from this vendor. We're going to call this one the primary case pack. Even though we've changed the primary vendor case pack from the single, the each, to the dozens, 12, the stock unit of measure quantity to reorder doesn't change here on the stock item record. It remains 15, which is the greater of the calculated value or the EOQ. You will, however, notice beneath it a field that says case pack quantity to reorder 2. And of course, along the left-hand side of this field section, you see the case pack quantity is 12. Now, since we know that 15 isn't divisible by 12, you can probably guess that when we go to reorder this item, we're going to order 2 dozen, which is going to substantially exceed the stock unit of measure quantity to reorder of 15, which is fine. Also, if you have a good eye, you will notice that case pack quantity to reorder. It wasn't there a moment ago. I'm working with a brand new version of the application, and I had to quickly add that during an intermission. Likewise, the list view stock items to reorder purchase rec, I went ahead and grabbed a different version of that just so we could see what that looks like. So here again, we see our 5VX 1000 belt, which needs to be purchased, and now it's saying we need to order 2 of 12 at a case pack price of 8 each. And we'll look at this more in the next lesson on purchasing, but when we generate a purchase requisition using this flow, it will indeed create a PR that has a quantity of 2 on a single line item. And this is the purchase order line, the order quantity, unit cost, and so forth. Now that we've seen how some of the inventory calculations take place on the stock item record, it's worth reviewing the planned stock item, the PSI, which we talked about in lesson 2 on work management. You may recall that work orders can have planned stock on them. And planned stock items are those stock items which are planned or used on which work orders. And the planned stock object contains planned quantity, issued quantity, and open quantity, as you can see here. And even so-called unplanned stock items can be put on any work order, and the planned quantity can be 0, the issued quantity can be 1. Looking at one of these planned stock items, for example, here we see the checkbox commit inventory is checked, and today's date is 25 August 2022. Since the lead time on this planned stock is 7 days, that means the inventory was committed on the 22nd, which was 3 days ago. This committed quantity, which you can see here, this will be reflected on the stock item record for this oil filter. If we have a look at it, we see the on-hand quantity is 5, but there is an available quantity of only 4. On this stock item record, if we went to open work orders, we would see this work order number 6, and that corresponding planned stock record. And again, as you may remember from the lesson 2 on work management, this planned stock on this preventive work order, it was defined on the model work order. So the PM schedule created this preventive work order, and the planned stock was created in advance. Now, during the scheduling or the performance of this particular work order, you may decide that you need to add something here. And we're going to go ahead and add a couple of these belts that we've been looking at already. And we're going to put the need by date as August 31st. Let's navigate back to our stock item record, which we can do in any number of ways, but we'll just do it through the related list here. You now see here, this is the on-hand quantity of our 5VX1000. It says 27, but again, the available quantity now is 25 since 2 are committed. Again, on the stock item record, you see several related tabs: open purchase orders, open work orders, open stock issue requests, open transfer orders. Here again, this is the same work order, and here's the planned stock item line. AssetOptics gives you a few different ways to issue stock items. Some of it will depend on your business practices. That is, do you have a storeroom clerk who is solely responsible for issuing parts, or do you allow mechanics and technicians to issue parts to themselves? How tightly you control that process will probably influence how you choose to issue stock items. Here I'm on a work order, and let's say that this one was in progress. It's in a ready to schedule status, but I could change that. If I just wanted to issue a part or issue a stock item to this work order, there's a button here that says issue stock item, at which point I could simply look up the item I wanted to issue, let's say this V belt, pick the appropriate storeroom, there may be more than one, and the quantity, and boom, just like that, I've issued a part. You'll also recall that this creates a planned stock item record, even though this was not planned stock. But speaking of planned stock, this work order has 3 planned stock items on it. At this point, I could create a stock issue request. There's an action button at the top of in the header that says Create SIR, and what an SIR is essentially a pick ticket. When you invoke that action, what will happen is it will take all of the open planned stock items that are on the work order, and you can select them and create the SIR. If we navigated to the newly linked stock issue request, this would be the one that is fulfilled in the storeroom. Here we see the SIR line items, the number requested, issued, and on hand. Another way we might issue a stock item to a work order is to actually just go to the stock item record. This might be a walk-up scenario where someone asks to look up a part. You go to the 4L160 belt, click this new inventory transaction button, and again here we have the options to issue, gain, or shrink. Here we're going to issue. I'm going to say a quantity of 2, and I'm going to choose the secondary bin location, and I will pick this work order and save. The last topic in today's lesson on MRO inventory management will be transfer orders. Transfer orders could also be discussed in lesson 5 on purchasing, but we'll have a look at them now. As you see here, we have a list view of item masters, and you will recall, of course, that we've created a stock item here for this 5VX1000 belt. And on that stock ID, we created the record and specified that its sourcing type is purchase order. We specified vendor case packs, and we even went through an example or two of like creating a purchase requisition. But as mentioned earlier, it's also possible to set up stock items which are replenished via transfer order. And typically this is done when you have one main storeroom and you have one or more satellite storerooms. Let's navigate back to the item master record that we were on a moment ago. And let's click the new stock item button up here. When we select the storeroom this time, I'm going to select the satellite storeroom and hit save. And I'm going to navigate to that newly created stock item record, which we see here. Instead of accepting the default parameter of purchase order, this time I'm going to select transfer order. And instead of creating a vendor case pack, instead what we'll do is we'll pick the source storeroom, that is the place where we know we're going to replenish from, and the source stock item. The source stock item in this case will be sort of like the vendor case pack. At this point, we have an ordinary stock item record, and like any other stock item, we probably want to specify the reorder point. I'm going to put it in edit mode here and scroll down, and I'm going to say reorder point of 5. And since we have an on-hand quantity of 0 and a reorder point of 5, the stock unit to measure quantity to reorder is 5. There is a list view here that says items to reorder transfer order. It's very similar to purchase rec. And here we have a list of items to reorder transfer order. So I'll select the 5VX1000 and initiate a transfer order. You'll see in the upper right-hand corner 2 action buttons. Instead of generate PO, I'll click generate TO. And again, it steps me through very similar to creating a purchase requisition. I can quickly show you what that looks like, but we won't go through the entire process. Suffice to say, a corresponding transfer order will be created when we release this, and that transfer order will make its way to the source storeroom. What we see here is the transfer in order, and if we look at the TO line, we see the proper quantity. We can update the status of this to released, and at that point it will create a corresponding transfer out order, TO0005 in this case. If we looked at this, it would basically be the mirror image of this, except that the user is only looking at the one that he or she creates. And that concludes Lesson 5 on MRO inventory management. If you have questions, you can reach us at the following email address or via our website.